Donald Trump that I know, that I worked for 23 years, 20 of those years was doing most of his major deals. He said, all right, let's cut the baloney, okay? Nothing that has been done before has ever worked. It's time to figure out a different solution, not just for Israelis, by the way. He fully acknowledged the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. He basically said they're living in hell. So he's saying, stop with all the diplomacy and the doublespeak and all these things that are never going to happen. Let's come up with other ways to figure out this problem. And it reminds me when he met Prime Minister Netanyahu the first time in 2017 at the White House. And I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, one state, two state, it doesn't matter, let's figure out a solution.
I remember.
The press and the diplomatic world went crazy. They said, oh, he's upending decades of foreign policy. He's doing it again. But the benefit of doing it again is that you get people focused and thinking and acknowledging the reality of the situation, which is a bad situation, as we all know.
I am really delighted, both personally and professionally, to welcome a friend, a colleague, Jason Greenblatt, former Special Envoy of President Trump in his first administration, and the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs Senior Fellow for Arab-Israeli Diplomacy. Jason, it's wonderful to have you back. You're back from other places in the Middle East, and this is the first time since the administration has been, president has been inaugurated, the administration has gotten into the cockpit, as they say in Israel, that you're really weighing in on some of these issues, wanting to wait to see, how we can create some context to this very complex set of variables and a very complex reality in the Middle East. So welcome back to Jerusalem, back to your other home, Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs.
Thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's such an important time, given the Prime Minister's visit to the White House, President Trump's remarks. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely wonderful. It's wonderful to see your son Avery here too with us. It's really delightful to have a Greenblatt family affair. Question for you: how surprised are you, in retrospect, knowing your boss, having worked with him for many, many years, not just the 4 years you were in the White House, as to the, I would call it, if we understood the Middle East 100 years ago to be the mandate for Palestine, in which the League of Nations empowered the British Empire to administer what was then called the geographical area called Mandate Palestine. And today, in 2025, it may not be an exaggeration to call it the Trump mandate for the Middle East.
No, I agree. Look, people are criticizing him. Some people love what he said. Other people are criticizing him. But the Donald Trump that I know, that I worked for 23 years, 20 of those years was doing most of his major deals. He understands things like nobody else and is not afraid to call a spade a spade. So, everybody's stuck on this phrase, two-state solution. This is occupied Palestinian territory, which it's not. It's disputed territory. He said, all right, let's cut the baloney, okay? Nothing that has been done before has ever worked. It's time to figure out a different solution, not just for Israelis, by the way. He fully acknowledged the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. He basically said they're living in hell. So he's saying, stop with all the diplomacy and the doublespeak and all these things that are never going to happen. Let's come up with other ways to figure out this problem. And it reminds me when he met Prime Minister Netanyahu the first time in 2017 at the White House. And I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, one state, two state, it doesn't matter, let's figure out a solution.
I remember.
The press and the diplomatic world went crazy. They said, oh, he's upending decades of foreign policy and this and that and this and that. He's doing it again. But the benefit of doing it again is that you get people focused and thinking and acknowledging the reality of the situation, which is a bad situation, as we all know.
Do you think there's a position to say that President Trump is applying the principles of the art of the deal, his best-selling book, the New York Times bestseller, to the Middle East, saying, you know what? It's a borderless concept. We can, if it applies to real estate, if it applies to the West, it can also apply to the Middle East.
Yeah, people criticize him and our administration, when I was there, the current administration, oh, this isn't a business, this isn't a real estate transaction. And to some degree, it's true. There's religion plays a role here, history, nationalism. There's a lot of layers to this conflict. But at the end of the day, just like running the government, this is real estate, it's a business, and you can't ignore that. I'm not saying it's the only principle, but let's not pretend it isn't part of the principle. So people are saying it's a negotiation tactic. If he asks for this, maybe he'll get half of this. Maybe there's an element of that. There probably is an element of that. But what I think people should focus on much more than it being an element of that is he's saying you cannot build a foundation that's so complicated when the main pillar of the foundation is faulty, is shaky. So he's not going to go down the rabbit hole of a two-state solution as it's traditionally been asked for by the Palestinians or demanded by the Palestinians, supported by the United Nations and many countries around the world, when he sees that there's a rotten core. He first needs to fix the rotten core, even if it means he's pointing it out in a way that makes people uncomfortable, makes people angry, makes people upset. He's saying, let's figure out the rotten core. And part of that rotten core is Gaza. I remember so well when colleagues of mine at the State Department and the National Security Council used to brief me. And the briefings were very valuable, even if I disagreed with them. Let's say I was considered center-right. Some of them were center, many of them were on the left, and they would brief me all the time. But the first couple of meetings, when they would brief me and they'd speak about all the solutions that have been tried before and why can't we just do this two-state solution with modifications here and there, I remember asking them specifically, I said, you gave me hours of lectures, and let me ask you a question. What do we do about Gaza? The 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas, which was in control at the time, although none of us could have ever imagined the horrors of October 7. And you know what they said? Literally, shh, don't talk about Gaza, don't talk about Hamas. Let's first get them in the room and have a two-state solution, and then we'll figure out Gaza. It's upside down. And President Trump is not an upside-down thinker. He's a reality-based thinker. He's saying, let's put it right back where it belongs. Let's understand the issues. We're not going to put Gaza last. We're not going to put Hamas last. There's no point in wasting time talking about it unless we could figure out how to deal with some of the real problems, which obviously includes Hamas.
Jason, what is fascinating about the president's declaration, as far-reaching as it is and controversial in many quarters as it is that he single-handedly has disemboweled the entire mythology about what has been called Palestine, meaning that the Jews really have not had any historical connection beside the 3,600-year-old history that it has with the region. And what the president has done is to essentially uproot the entire mythology that has really captured the imaginations and operationalized a lot of the anti-Semitism in the West, as if there's been an inversion of legitimacy, particularly expressed since October the 7th massacre, where Israel sort of became this sort of Hamas terror organization, and Hamas became the virtuous fledgling pre-state Palestine. He completely detonated that entire narrative, and I think that is nothing short of revolutionary in the context of the modern Middle East.
100%. And even before you get to that, because his comments were so controversial to some, people are forgetting some of the very important things he spoke about there, right? He was front and center about the horrors of October 7 and the disgusting denial of October 7. He even, equated it to Holocaust denial. Presidents normally don't do that. He went right for the gut with that and said, stop saying it didn't happen. It happened. He spoke about the rape, the torture, and things like that.
Which he witnessed. Apparently, he saw the video.
I've heard it. I don't know that he saw it, but I've heard that he saw the video, and he should. I mean, the fact that a president, who would not think of showing the president the video? You have to see it to understand it. He went right after the people that denied it, the people on college campuses, the protests on the city streets. So people should understand that what he's trying to do is reset the table and explain to people this happened. And when he said that, it brought me back to a time where we were trying to figure out, is there a way, this is back in maybe 2018, is there a way to clean out Gaza from Hamas? And every which way we thought it's impossible. Israel's never going to go in just on a whim to clean it out. Too much damage and destruction could happen. Certainly America's not going to go in. And then in the end, Israel did go in because of what happened on October 7, and exactly what we would have thought would happen if there was no reason for Israel to go in. The world largely condemned Israel for doing something it absolutely had to do, that it was justified in doing. Imagine if Israel had gone in without October 7. So what he's saying is, I saw what happened on October 7. Israel was right to do it. Israel was brave to do it. We have to destroy Hamas. Don't think he didn't see the scenes of the hostages being released with a I've heard they drug them. I don't know. They parade them and give them awards, and they make them smile and laugh. I mean, the psychological torture. He sees all of that, and he absorbs it, and he understands it. And all of this is in his head. And this is the messaging he's projecting back on the world, which is enough of this nonsense.
Well, it's very interesting observation here in the context of many in the Middle East, in the Arab leaderships of the 22 Arab Muslim countries across the Middle East, see Trump as a classic American, Western hardcore businessman. But I think we could really say that President Trump speaks Middle East. And in that sense, and you're also very sensitive to the Middle East with lots of relationships in the Arab world, and you are appreciated in the Arab world for honoring the Arab world. What kind of message can this discussion send to the Arab world in a way to reassure them that President Trump is not dishonoring them or trying to dictate to them or disrespecting them, but he's actually trying to approach diplomacy, even in a way that Mohammed bin Salman is approaching technology in a very entrepreneurial spirit.
He wants to partner with them, and he was clear. And it's another message that sort of gets lost because of the controversial part about dislocating, or whatever the right word is for the Palestinians. He was equally pro-Israel, very pro-Israel, and at the same time made it very clear he has a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia. I believe he also spoke about the UAE. He certainly even mentioned Qatar. He said Qatar was very helpful. So how many people could actually sit on the stage, and certainly the President of the United States, and both be extremely pro-Israel and pro-Saudi and pro-Qatar and pro-UAE, because he has those relationships. He both respects all of them. They respect all of him, and he does speak Middle Eastern. So if I were advising the Arab countries, I would say to them, look, it isn't what you like to hear. And I understand your protest, and I understand your support, tremendous support of the Palestinian people. And I'm not going to convince you, nor will I convince my Palestinian friends that they're wrong. I long ago deeply understood that they're not going to convince me that their narrative is correct entirely. Some of it is. I'm not going to convince them that my narrative is correct. I think all of it is. But he is able to respect everybody and really just look for a solution, which is why, by the way, in the first term, and this came through loud and clear this time, he speaks about peace. He doesn't speak about how you get there. We never use the phrase two-state solution because it means different things to different people. And, of course, using it after October 7, falls on deaf ears among so many in the pro-Israel community, as it should for now anyway. But he's basically saying Saudi Arabia wants peace. What that means, we're going to have to figure it out. But we're not going to be able to figure it out unless we look it straight in the eye and say, here are the problems. The hell that the Palestinians have been living in, which, by the way, wasn't caused by Israel. It was caused by Hamas. The recent part, of course, they're suffering because it's a war, a justified war, but they're suffering. And he wasn't afraid to acknowledge that. But he's saying, let's do something different and figure out how we could get everybody living good lives.
And doing something different, Jason, we have to admit and put on this table for our Arab colleagues throughout the region, was very difficult for Israel to accept a few weeks ago when the president said, I want a hostage deal now. There's going to be hell to pay for the Hamas, and there's also going to be pressure on our friend Israel to do the deal now. This was not an easy deal to swallow for Israel. In fact, it must be said it was a very painful deal because of the security compromises that Israel had to make, because of the compromises that Israel had to make in only receiving, 3 or perhaps 4 hostages at a time, giving Hamas a perceptual victory within the Arab world as being able to hold Israel by the neck and just sort of dribble a few hostages while, as you said, creating this sort of Pallywood, Gazawood, grotesque snuff movie in the way that they dressed up the women that they abused and even worse, and released them. So the bottom line is also for the rest of the Middle East, this was a very, very difficult deal for Israel to accept, and they did accept it, proving in a sense that the president is even-handed in the type of pressure that he applies to all parties involved in order to change the whole paradigm of stability, security, and peacemaking in the region.
Absolutely. Look, I don't envy the prime minister and those who were in the room with him for making that decision. I don't know what went on behind closed doors. Very few people actually know, but I'm sure it was an agonizing decision. What I do want to point out, because you raised this topic, is those people, whether they're pundits or armchair diplomats, anybody who's outside the room should not be criticizing the Prime Minister or Steve Witkoff or President Trump unless you really know what was going on inside the room. I was very disappointed to see how hard people hit Steve Witkoff. He's doing nothing, first of all, other than the president's agenda, but more importantly, doing nothing other than trying to help. He's the one who helped get the hostages home. I think anyone who complains about that should go meet some of the hostage families' loved ones and complain to them about the deal. I think if just about anybody that I know, if their loved one was stuck in Gaza as a hostage, would have signed on to that deal, no matter the danger, the painful consequences, and things like that. So I'd recommend that people who don't really know what's going on behind closed doors should wait and see how things unfold, as we saw in this visit with Bibi Netanyahu and President Trump, because probably a lot of what we saw in that visit might have been behind that first part of the hostage deal.
Yes, clearly. And you spoke before we went on the air about the tendency for people to fashion themselves as experts in the Middle East, to act reflexively. And we, in that context, we discussed the complexities of the Middle East. I mean, what a complex region to really understand the nuances, the black swan events, not being able to plan anything from minute to minute. And I remember your term as the special envoy of President Trump, and you were, having to adjust from moment to moment the people you were meeting, the positions you were taking. Help us, in your experience, understand how enormously unpredictable this region is, and how it really perhaps requires us to be very modest in the way we approach problems.
Well, if you want to take the best example of unpredictability, and I don't want to compare the Abraham Accords to President Trump's solution regarding Gaza, but in a way they're similar. When we started in the White House, nobody ever would have imagined the Abraham Accords could happen. In fact, when there were whisperings about what used to be called the outside-in approach, where you make peace with the Arabs and the Palestinians will come along, everybody said it would never happen. Everyone's familiar. Most people who listen to this will probably be familiar with the John Kerry, no, it'll never happen, almost echoing, the no from Khartoum from many, many years ago. Nobody would ever believe it would happen. And yet President Trump got it done. So it's not to compare. These are different. This is much more serious, much more complex. That it's 2 million Palestinians or so. It's a destination now. Gaza is just completely filled with rubble. But at the same time, it was outside the box thinking. It was a unique president who could speak his mind without being afraid of offending people, by getting people thinking. So unpredictability for sure. In addition to that, I think what's very important is for people of whatever side of the equation they're on to really put themselves in the other side's shoes, right? I could sit here all day and give you every right-wing argument. Jordan is Palestine, all Gazans, all 2 million of them would do anything just to get out of Gaza and live in Canada or something like that. It's not true. So not a lot is actually gained, and certainly nothing will be solved on either side by sticking to your normal talking points, because it sounds great at the dinner parties that you go to that are part of your own circle, right? Your own echo chamber. I could read, right-wing newspapers in Israel or in America or wherever all the time and feel like, oh, they kind of get me, they kind of get my feelings, but who cares? What you really have to do, which is what I was very honored and I would say blessed to do, is meet the Palestinians, meet the Saudis, meet the Emiratis, meet people from Qatar and understand how they see the equation. I'm going to quote a friend of mine from Qatar who said something to me after October 7, before this President Trump's idea, but she said, look, people are talking about, evacuating Gazans. Well, if you want to evacuate them to Egypt, it's not going to happen. You know that. Why doesn't Prime Minister Netanyahu allow them to evacuate into the Negev, let them stay there while they clean out Gaza? Now, of course, that'll never happen either, but it was an outside-the-box idea, and if you really want to be intellectually honest, you'd have to say, okay, yeah, you could figure out the security challenge of doing that. Okay, that's a fair point. It'll never happen, I get it, but at least she's saying, you want to evacuate them? Egypt can't do it for a certain reason. Israel could probably keep security. And maybe that's an idea. So fine, I don't agree with it, but I applaud her for actually talking about it and not just reflexively saying Israel is terrible, Israel's terrible, Israel's terrible, which isn't the case.
The president's deal of the century, which you were one of the architects of the deal of the century, together with an Israeli U.S. team, an Arab team, actually, to think through these complex issues that began with the economic workshop, which was the Peace to Prosperity workshop with your former colleague Jared Kushner. It seems that the president's thinking has evolved from the deal of the century, that in the meantime we suffered the massacre of the century. And he then said the other day on television several times, responding to repeated questions from the press, but what about a Palestinian state, Mr. President? Do you support a Palestinian state? And he kept repeating, I want peace. We want peace. He avoided the issue of a Palestinian state, repeated his Gaza commitment, and kept talking about peace. So this is a real shift from President Trump in 2016 to President Trump in 2025.
It goes back to him trying to only make deals or work on deals that are actually achievable. There's a lot of criticism about the peace plan that we drafted back then that was released, I think, in January of 2020. And criticism from all sides, on the Israeli side, on the right, certainly on the Palestinian side. Palestinian leadership wouldn't even read it, which I think was a huge missed opportunity. In fact, if I was sitting with President Abbas right now, I would say something like, do you miss us, right? Because things have only gotten worse for them. President Biden wasn't the hero that they expected. We could criticize certain things President Biden did, but he certainly was not giving the two-state solution a go at it. And he did some important things for Israel after October 7, even if I think he made mistakes along the way. And certainly President Trump's remarks make clear where he's going. But I think one of the main questions I used to ask people who would always complain that we wouldn't use the two-state solution phrase was, what does that mean for you, for Israel's security? If you're saying that Israel should, let's say they come up with a land deal, evacuate areas that you call or that you think should be Palestine, right? And cross their fingers and hope everything will be safe and secure, there's no way in the world any normal state would do that. Certainly Israel wouldn't do it. And why would America try to convince Israel to do it? It makes no sense. Now, after October 7, of course it makes no sense. It's not that we knew October 7 was going to happen, but you could have an imagination and understand why that doesn't work. So those people that are talking about a fully sovereign Palestinian state or a vague Palestinian state who aren't looking at reality and what that actually means to Israel and the region, because if Israel is unstable, the region's unstable. And that's why he stays away from those phrases. It's why we did it the first time, which is, can we figure out what peace means? We'll argue about it. We'll fight about it. God willing, we'll eventually achieve it. Maybe not today. Maybe it's a long way off. Certainly, we all hope it's sooner. But why are we trying to dictate the terms of what it means?
Why try to dictate the terms of what it means? And let us reflect on the fact that the president is an economic warrior. In a sense, the president's term maximum pressure has narrow specific understandings and has broader meanings as well. And in the first part of in this question and discussion, I want to ask your sense of, the president has said, look, we give billions of dollars to the Arab world, Egypt, Jordan, and if we give them billions of dollars to help them secure themselves, and they're really what we call Arab amenable states to the United States. The word ally, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But, the president's logic is if we give them so much money, we want to get something back for it. So perhaps there is some logic in saying, well, Egypt and Jordan, I know you're living in a very uncertain time. There's a lot of restiveness within your domestic scene. Egypt with 100 million people, hungry, dissatisfied, high unemployment, Jordan even more precarious, semicolon, but comma. Isn't there a position to say that you guys have to pull some weight here on the Gazan issue without shooting yourself in the head?
But how you said it is how it should be said, meaning you just went through all the nuances of the complexity. Unfortunately, what happens is, people on the right will say, well, Jordan is 70% Palestinian. We just cut their funding and all will be great. It doesn't work that way, and you clearly explain why. Egypt has these challenges, but Egypt could easily absorb, 2 million Palestinians in its very, very large population, and nothing should happen. Also not true. So conversations like that are not helpful. How you addressed it, which is saying, look, here are all the problems. This is President Trump talking. Here are all the problems you have. I get it. I'm your friend. I respect you. But you do need to pull some weight. Let's figure out how you could pull the weight. On the other side, If these Arab countries are simply saying, absolutely not, we're not doing anything, don't even look to us, that's not going to sit well with President Trump. And if I were advising them, I'd say, you need to come to the table and either provide alternate solutions, or if you're not providing alternate solutions, be willing to talk about alternate solutions and how can you be helpful. Nobody's there to try to attack you. Egypt and Jordan are very important allies of the United States. The security of Israel is largely dependent on having those two countries be safe and secure and sound. But there needs to be a change in the dynamic. And that is what President Trump is good at, which is saying enough of the status quo. We need to figure out how to keep you as happy as you could be, you as happy as you could be, you as safe as you could be, you as safe as you could be, but with your cooperation, trying to fix this problem, including trying to fix the problem of 2 million Palestinians who are not going to be living in tents if President Trump's idea doesn't move forward. And if we have to be honest about it, we understand that it's not an uphill battle. It's like 50 uphill battles, if not more. Do we want 2 million Palestinians living in tents for the next 15 years? Of course not. Nobody wants that. So fine, let's just figure out what are possible solutions.
Jason, people in the West and even here in Israel and in the region are saying they're calling this transfer, which is a mistake. The president did not call for forced transfer of anybody from anywhere. He did speak as a business arrangement of what they call, agreement. Moving by agreement. And those who know the president means that involves some sort of financial compensation to families who would agree to be relocated permanently or beyond in some other area. And I think it's important for us to make this point because nobody is talking about forced transfer, which has, reminiscent of former dark regimes and current dark regimes. And number two, Gaza is not a sovereign territory. It is not owned by anyone except there are private land owners in Gaza. And it seems to me that the president is saying when he talks about buying out Gaza, or that he's going to be willing to pay lots of money to people in Gaza in exchange for that beachfront property.
So it's very important what you say, because although I was traveling and it was a little bit hard to keep up with the news, I did watch his remarks twice. And then I started seeing the news reports where people accusing him of ethnic cleansing, forcible transfer.
Right.
And I reached out to a couple of friends of mine, Palestinians, a couple of journalists, and I said, could you show me where in the transcript he said that? Because I didn't see that once. In 2 cases, a newsletter actually fixed their terminology. I didn't reach out to the New York Times. And I'm not 100% sure of this, but I believe the New York Times spoke about Trump calling for forcible transfer. People should pay attention to what he actually said. And I don't have the words in front of me now, but it was much more of course they're going to want to move. Like, why wouldn't they want to move? This is a hellhole, right? Not, I'm going to take either the U.S. military or I'm going to demand Egypt's military come and force the people out and all that. Probably among the worst offenders, and there are many, was, I can't even remember her name, Albanese at the UN, the special rapporteur.
Francesca Albanese.
If people haven't seen this, they should. And she's terrible on Twitter. She's probably terrible when she speaks, but she's such a manipulator. People should Google or YouTube the interview she gave on CNN, at least CNN International, because I was overseas. I don't know if it also aired in the States. She sits there with her dangling earrings and speaks about ethnic cleansing and accusing Israel of all these atrocious things. And I would say half of what she said was an outright lie. And you also touched on another important issue, which is, I'll use a real estate term, who owns Gaza, right? Yes, many in the international community believe it's occupied Palestinian territory, whatever that term means. It's not true. It was controlled by so many different places over the years. It was vacated by Israel. Fine, we could argue about whether Israel and Egypt's security blockade, made it, something different. But at the end of the day, it is not Palestinian. There was never a sovereign Palestine, not in Judea and Samaria, what people call the West Bank, and what should never really be called occupied Palestinian territory. That's a misnomer. It's a lie.
It was invented at the UN, by the way. They call it OPT. It started all the way back in the 70s.
Got it. So look, it sticks, right? These terms stick, especially when people from the UN or prime ministers elsewhere and things like that say these things. Get yourselves educated. Don't be like the brats, the crazy people at Columbia University and all these other universities who just hear things. Some of them don't even know which river and which sea, right? But they believe it. Educate yourself. We all acknowledge it is complex. It is disputed. It's a big fight. It's a historical fight. We all want it solved. It's not going to get solved when people dig in and say fake things like this Albanese woman.
Moving from Albanese for a moment to the Iranian regime seems to be actually a logical through line because of some of the similar positions that they hold, she and the mullahs. And in that context, Jason, it seems that President Trump's statement on Gaza was a real shot across the bow of the Iranian regime.
I think it was. I think he's, first of all, an even bigger shot across the bow was his comment, which I think was brilliant, whether it's legally allowed or not. I've left instructions if they assassinate me, right? His preferred choice is a deal. He's not made a secret about that. He's not interested in dragging America into war. He campaigned on not dragging America into war. He would much prefer a diplomatic solution, but that diplomatic solution has to be a real solution. He's a smart deal guy. He would never make a deal like Obama made. Everybody understands that. And he's saying, but by the way, if you're not going to make a deal, we are never going to let you have a nuclear weapon. So if I were the Iranian regime, which, by the way, I've been sanctioned by the Iranian regime, maybe I ought to be careful with what I'm saying. But if I were the Iranian regime, I'd say, okay, let's read between the lines. What is he actually saying? We, Iran, have a historical opportunity. Okay, if we really want to change Iran, I don't think they do, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. If they really want to change the Iranian regime and help the people of Iran, you have a very unique president and a very unique historical time to do it. But if at the end of the day you want to be the destructive force you've been for Iran, for the region, whether it's because of Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Syria, you name it, and if anywhere they've been, they've just destroyed all these societies. Okay, well, then you're going to face the Trump that you really don't want to face.
And the Trump you don't want to face, it seems to me, Jason, is the Trump that says peace through strength, and with an emphasis on strength in the sense that he said on the record that if every hostage in Gaza is not returned, there is going to be hell to pay, and the word violence came up. He said, we will use violence in order to achieve our goals. And I would like to apply that logic to the Iranian regime also, that the president, though he says he is the president to end all wars, it seems he is not at all hesitant to use massive military power to achieve, ultimately, peace through strength.
I agree. It's not his choice. He really prefers not to do it. What he wants to do, secure America's borders, fix the economy, drill, baby, drill. There are so many things on his list domestically to handle. But he's fully capable of doing everything at once. As we've seen, he had quite a flurry of activity from the minute he stepped in the Oval Office. That's another thing that people are missing, which is this is a guy, and I've seen it for 23 years, right? This is a guy who will work like crazy and have a team around him who will work like crazy to get his agenda done. And just because he's busy with the border or all the other things he wants to do in America doesn't mean he's not going to pay attention to the hot spots that either endanger America, weaken America, threaten America, or its important allies.
Absolutely. And as we end our really dramatic discussion, I would say, is there something that you wanted to say directly to our viewers and our friends and family, the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, close and afar?
So I'll just repeat something that I think is so important. Having been on the inside once and watched the media and pundits and think tanks and others, not your think tank, but, cover what we did. Take a deep breath before you post on Twitter. Check what you're reading, even if it's in a well-established, brand name media organization, because there are so many things that are written that are just wrong or that come, and this is such an important point, when people in the media write things that are sourced to non-named sources. I'm not saying it's not true, but very often it's not true, and that person who was entrusted with valuable information, who essentially is leaking to the media because they're afraid to post their name to it. In some cases, they might be floating a trial balloon, but in many cases, they're basically leaking to the media. Be suspicious. Check it out. Don't share it till you know it's real, or share it with a note, which I do to my family all the time. Hey guys, just saw this. I don't know if it's true. Don't share. Just putting it on your radar, that sort of thing. Don't be so reflexive, because there's so much more than meets the eye on these issues. And you'll only know kind of in hindsight after a long period of time, or let's just say a historic press conference and Oval Office meeting between a president and prime minister, as we witnessed this week. So just take a deep breath and let them do their work.
Let them do your work as we do our work here in Jerusalem. Jason Greenblatt, attorney Jason Greenblatt, former special envoy for President Trump to the Middle East, and a diplomatic fellow, the director of our Arab-Israeli diplomacy here at Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Thank you ever so much for giving us your initial observations since the inauguration on President Trump and the new mandate for the Middle East, perhaps nothing less.
Thanks for having me.